G'day guys, my name's Nick and this is Nicktrition. In today's video, I'm going to tell you all about a relatively new training method that can result in up to 75% more muscle and strength gains. So you might have noticed in the intro that I specified relatively new training method. And that's because the study that I'm going to reference most in this video, which I'll link in the description below, is from 2019. So it's a couple of years old already. But the study that's based on is actually from 2016. So even though it's only been recently that I've seen people adding this training method to their programs, and I've seen coaches selling programs based around this training method, it's actually been around for over 5 years, long enough that there's been a few studies on it. Each of the studies I've seen that have compared this method to more conventional methods of training and also equated total volume and mechanical tension have shown that this new method of training is actually far superior to your normal conventional, 3x10, 4x8 style of training. Alright, that's enough beating around the bush. Today we're talking about the 3-7 training method. And we're not talking about 3 sets of 7 reps. That would be too easy, too obvious. Everyone would already know about it, and I definitely would not be making a video on it. We're talking about the 3-7 training method, and it is actually an inverse pyramid. You may be familiar with your conventional pyramid training sets. This isn't that. You don't have a long rest between each set of decreasing reps. You actually have a very, very short rest in between each set of increasing reps. So you start with your first set of 3 reps, then you rest 15 seconds and you add 1 rep per set until you've done 7 reps in a single set. Then you rest 2 minutes, then you can repeat this again. In the studies, they've only gone up to 2 consecutive rounds of this, but I'd say you can probably push it to 3 without causing any detriment. So far, it's pretty simple. You start with 3 reps, you rest 15 seconds between each round, and you add a rep each set until you're doing 7 reps. So this could be actually really easy or really hard depending on how heavy you're lifting. So the load is going to be important. In the studies, they used 70% of the participants' 1 rep max. To find your 1 rep max, there are 3 pretty common ways. The first is very obvious. You perform 1 rep of whatever the lift is, then you increase the weight, perform a rep, increase the weight, and you repeat this process until you find that you can no longer perform 1 good rep. The heaviest weight you use to perform 1 good rep is your 1 rep max. The second method is to use an online calculator. There's literally an online calculator for everything these days, including your 1 rep max. So if you want to find out your 1RM, you find the calculator, you input the number of reps you did, the weight you did it with, and it will give you a rough estimate. You can check that estimate if you want, or you can just trust it, but remember, it's just an estimate. If you're used to lifting heavy weights for low reps, it's probably going to be kind of accurate. But if you're new to training, it's probably best just to find your own 1RM by doing the method I mentioned earlier and just repeat that fairly often, because if you're new to training, your strength and your muscle mass is going to increase way faster than somebody who's been doing it for a long time. The third method is to find your 10 to 12 rep max. Now, the 10 to 12 rep max usually tends to be around about 70% of somebody's 1RM. And if you're new to training, it's a lot safer than really loading up the bar and trying to find your actual 1RM. A 10 to 12 rep max is obviously going to require a lot less load and a lot more reps than finding your 1 rep max, and therefore it is inherently safer. However, if you're new to training, you might not be able to estimate this very well, and it's probably worth getting a coach or a trainer or somebody more experienced with lifting to help you actually find your failure point between 10 and 12 reps. If you used methods 1 or 2, then you're going to need to find 70% of whatever your 1 rep max weight is. You can do this easily by timesing that weight by 0.7, and then that's 70%. If you use method 3, you already know what 70% of your 1 rep max is, and you're good to go. So that's the basics. If all you wanted from this video was the name of the technique and how to do it, then you're pretty much done. You can hit that thumbs up button and be on your way. But if you want to know more information about it and what movements I think it's more appropriate for and what body parts I think it's going to work best for, then definitely stick around. In the 2019 study, they compared 2 groups, both performing bicep curls, and they had one group doing the 3-7 method twice, separated by 2.5 minutes. They also had a group doing 8 sets of 6 reps, separated by 2.5 minutes. Both of these groups used 70% of their 1 rep max, and they did it twice a week for 12 weeks. At the end of the 12 weeks, the 3-7 group saw an increase of 22% in strength and 9.6% in size. The control or the conventional group saw an increase of 12% strength and only 5.5% in size. This means that it's around about 75% difference between the control group and the group doing the 3-7 method. So for the duration of the 12 weeks, both groups used 70% of their 1RM, so the same load, and they both did the same amount of volume per session. This means that the difference between these two training techniques is independent of either the load or the volume. There are a couple of differences between both groups though. I think the biggest and most obvious is the amount of time spent resting. In the 3-7 group, they have a total of 6.5 minutes of rest if they have 15 seconds between each little set and 2.5 minutes between both rounds. In the conventional training group, they had 2.5 minutes between each set. So 8 by 2.5 minutes means 20 minutes of total rest time. This means that each set performed by the 3-7 group was probably closer in proximity to failure, which we all know now is one of the primary drivers of hypertrophy. But there's another driver of hypertrophy that most people don't talk about too much, and that's metabolic stress. Now, metabolic stress is probably too complicated for this video, but if you want to know more about it, let me know in the comments below and I'll make a video on that topic. But for now, you can kind of just think of it as the pump. The bigger your pump, the more metabolic stress. If you've ever experienced a pump, then you probably realize that the higher volume your set is and the lower your rest time, the more pump you have, and therefore the more metabolic stress you have. Now we know that metabolic stress isn't the prime driver of hypertrophy because we know that proximity to failure is. However, higher metabolic stress, or the more pump you have, the harder it is to do more volume in each set. Therefore, the proximity to failure is probably going to be closer than if you had a long rest period and had time for your body to flush away all the metabolites.
It was at this moment that he knew. He fucked up.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
So taking all that into account, it's probably pretty fair to assume that the differences in size and strength between these two groups is probably down to the metabolic stress or the pump. This doesn't mean you should just train for the pump. If anything, this study shows that you're probably more likely to grow muscle if you include mechanical tension and metabolic stress over just mechanical tension. The 3-7 method is not the only way to cause metabolic stress. Other good ways to get a pump are things like supersets, trisets, giant sets, which are all kind of the same thing, myo reps and rest pauses, which are kind of similar to the 3-7 method. One of them is just backwards and one of them is different durations of resting. But basically, it's all about building up those metabolites, making it harder to lift more reps, and therefore your proximity to failure for a given weight is lower. One of the biggest questions I get about this study is, why do they compare the 3-7 method to the control group of 8 sets of 6 reps of bicep curls? And there's a few reasons for this. The bicep curls is because it's an easy movement that you can actually use consistent measuring on when you're studying in the lab. You hook them up to a machine which measures kinetic output, and you can actually measure things like total force production and maximum voluntary contraction and these sorts of measurements that they use in these studies. They can also do that with things like leg extensions and leg curls and even tricep extensions, but usually it's going to be a single joint exercise. Why did they choose 8 sets of 6 reps? Well, there's a previous study, the 2016 study I spoke about earlier, where they compared the 3-7 method, which is 25 total reps, to 4 sets of 6 reps, which is 24 total reps. I think the reason they chose 8 sets of 6 reps is purely to equate volume. 8 sets of 6 reps is 48 reps, and 2 rounds of the 3-7 method is 50 reps. It's not exact, but it's pretty close. In the previous study that this study actually references, and the one I spoke about before from 2016, they actually compared 1 round of the 3-7 method with a 4x6 rep scheme. And in this study, they also included an 8x6 rep scheme. Now, the 3-7 did much better than the 4x6, but the 8x6 did much better than the 3-7, which is kind of obvious because 48 reps is way more volume than 25 reps. The outcome of that study actually led to this study, which, to go full circle, is probably why they chose 8 sets of 6 reps. Additionally, due to being predominantly fast-twitch muscle fibers, a lot of people choose to train their biceps with lower volume and higher intensity or load, purely just to appease that fiber type. I would say to make the 8x6 method a bit more effective, you could increase the weight and thereby making each set harder and taking you closer to that proximity to failure that we've spoken about earlier. I would say you're probably still going to come up short if you compare it to the 3-7 method though, because the 3-7 method really only has that 6.5 minutes of resting through the whole 50 reps, where to get the 48 reps of the 8x6 method, you're kind of looking at more like 20 minutes of resting. All the studies I've seen so far have been done using isolation exercises, so I'm using it in my program for isolation exercises. You probably could use it for compound movements, especially if they're performed on machines, but I'd probably avoid using compound movements combined with free weights for this method. Why? Because when one muscle starts to fatigue, some other muscles can take over. If you're in a machine, it's harder for other muscles to take over because the plane of movement is really restricted. And if you're doing isolation exercises, if you keep good form, it's also really hard for other muscles to take over. Would I use it in my program? Yeah, I am. I'm currently using it in my program right now. It's kind of new, so you probably haven't seen any difference, and I certainly haven't seen any difference. But in a couple of months, if I'm looking real jacked, it's probably because I use the 3-7 method. I'm using it solely with isolation exercises because that's what they did in all the studies, and I think a compound exercise, if you're not on a machine, might allow other muscle groups to take over when fatigue starts to set in, which could lead to not as much hypertrophy in the target muscle group. If you have access to machines though, give it a go, chuck it in your program, do it for a couple of months and let me know in the comments of this video or DM me on Instagram or something, and let me know if you've noticed any difference incorporating the 3-7 method into compound movements. I personally am just using it for bis and tris at the moment, and when I can get back in a gym and have access to a leg extension and leg curl, I'll probably use it on those as well. So that's the 3-7 method. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see more videos like this, where I break down a study or a group of studies or a meta-analysis or something like that. I find it really enjoyable to do the research, and hopefully you find it enjoyable or at least easy to understand in the video. If you have any further questions, let me know in the comments. If I've mentioned anything in this video and you're not quite sure what it is, like, I don't know, supersets or myo reps or something, let me know in the comments if you want me to make a video about them. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. That is literally liking the video, so YouTube knows that you liked it. But also, if you like me and you're not subscribed already, please consider subscribing. Until next time, I've been Nick, this has been Nicktrition, and I'll see you in the next video.